And to remind everybody that the recording will be available about a week from now on the River Edge website. So I think John's unmuted himself, and you can get started then, John.
Okay. All right. I was doing a Zoom call the other night, and my wife was intrigued by the fact that I could be muted or unmuted. And so I asked her not to participate in this until I'm done making the introduction, because she loves the idea of possibly muting me. I tend to be a little long-winded at times, and I'm going to try to keep this short. I first met Braden, and Braden, if you want to unmute yourself and jump in and correct me, you can. But I first met Braden back in 2012 and 2013. And I have a hunch, Mary, that you were there also. It was on an owl prowl that we did in the woods behind Pioneer Village. It was a combined River Edge Friends of the Cedarbird Bog owl walk. And Carl, you might have been there too. I don't recall. You were. Yep. And I think Tom Utek was also there. So we all met Braden at the same time. I think he was there with just your dad or both your parents.
I believe my dad and my brother were there, but my dad and my brother had to bail because it was too cold for them.
Okay. Well, it was not a very productive owl prowl, but I think we had a distant barred owl make a call. But anyway, Braden got hooked on owl prowls, and I think he attended practically every single owl prowl that we offered, either at the Friends or at River Edge since. And I remember one owl prowl, we were having trouble getting the owls to respond, and Braden asked if he could do an imitation of a barred owl. And by golly, it was a really good imitation. And I think we got a response from the owl to his imitation of the owl as opposed to the recording. So it's been a real trip, Braden, seeing you develop your birding skills going all the way back to 2012. Braden is now 15, and he has done just incredible birding since then. He's frequently showing up on eBird, finding rare species. He's pretty serious about this. He even has spent time sketching birds so that he can better remember what he saw. And he's become an excellent photographer. So any of you who are on eBird probably have seen his name pop up frequently. He's also assisted on many volunteer projects, particularly at the Cedarbird Bog. So he and his dad helped rebuild a boardwalk that was damaged. He's helped me many times with taking care of wood duck nest boxes and so forth. And he's even helped pick up trash along Cedar Sauk Road. So he's jumped into this whole birding thing and natural history thing with both feet. And I'm really proud to be able to introduce him. He and I have talked for some time about his Eagle Scout project. By the way, I'm also going to mention that Braden is on the swim team, the track team, and he's pretty much a straight A student at Grafton High School. So anyway, he's on a path to some really good things, and I'm just so excited that he's going to be doing this Eagle Scout project. And I'll let Braden talk more about that rather than me talk about the project. But I'm hoping that everybody will pay close attention, and I'm really hoping that some of us can step up and support him, not only morally, but financially at the end of his presentation. So with that, take it away, Braden.
Thank you, John. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a slideshow presentation summarizing my Eagle Scout project. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Braden Meyer, and this is my Eagle Scout project, black tern nesting platforms at Mud Lake. First, I'd like to introduce myself a little bit. I am 15 years old and I live here in Grafton. I am a Life Scout in Boy Scout Troop 840, and I love birds. I can never get enough of them. I like to think that every day I go birding because when I'm driving in the car, I'm always looking up.
Awesome.
What was that?
I said that's beautiful. You're just like me, Afton. And I live along the river. And I'm a master gardener and master naturalist. And I'm very pleased that you are part of our community. It's such a joy that you're speaking to here tonight. Thank you very much, Brady.
Thank you. In the last about four or 5 years, I would say, my birding experiences and enthusiasm have grown immensely. I've met many new people, John, Carl, and Jim Ellis. I've met them on birding and other nature hikes. I really like to chase rare birds, but not quite old enough, so I have to rely on my parents and grandparents and friends to drive me to see some of these birds, but it really means a lot when they do. I've taken up photography as a hobby, and
Perfect.
you can see on this slideshow some of the pictures of birds I have taken. There's some of the highlights. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of my presentation, it's important to know what black terns are. Black terns are a species in the family Laridae, which include gulls, terns, and skimmers. And they are one of the smallest, if not the smallest, tern in North America. And they're very special because most terns are usually seen near large bodies of water, like Lake Michigan and Lake Winnebago. I have seen other species of terns on. But these terns are special. They nest in swamps, marshes, and other smaller bodies of water, often associated with extensive cattail growth. And in the winter, they can be found off the coasts of South America and Mexico. Their nesting is somewhat special. They nest on floating vegetation and mud flats if the water is low enough. Unfortunately, these nesting habits often make them prone to predation by otters, and also they can be affected by high water levels. When the birds are nesting, you would think that they would be eating fish, but actually the primary food source for the young are aquatic insects, which are caught by flight.
Like lake flies in Winnebago that I grew up on, the midges.
Yes, yeah. Also,
Okay.
deer flies and dragonflies, they also like to eat. Why are these terns endangered? The main threat is habitat loss. The draining of wetlands and marshes have been known in some areas to completely wipe out black tern populations. I read articles from Pennsylvania, and they were talking about they had a healthy population, and a development company bought this area of land and they drained the wetlands, and now there are no more terns there. Another hardship for these birds are the use of pesticides. These pesticides pollute the water in the form of runoff, and they also can decrease the amount of food in the area. Why I want to help these terns? I've seen these birds several times in areas like the Horicon Marsh and the Max State Wildlife Area in Outagamie County, and they are fun to watch. They fly very acrobatically, and they just dive headfirst into the water. And when it was time to do my Eagle Scout project, I learned that these birds are an endangered species in Wisconsin. And talking with John O'Donnell from the Friends of the Cedarburg Bog, I learned that these terns once nested in the bog. And pretty much from that point forward, I was determined to bring these birds back. There are a couple locations in the bog that I theorized putting these platforms, but the best one that I could think of was on Mud Lake, on a small tributary on the northern part of the lake. This area is covered with cattails, which would be ideal cover from predators. And Mud Lake is also very plentiful with deer flies and dragonflies, which will be very good for the food for the young. And also there isn't a whole lot of boat traffic or foot traffic on Mud Lake, so the minimal disturbance would also help our odds. What do the platforms do? The platforms are a more reliable substitute to the floating mud, as high water can submerge or destroy these mud flats or floating vegetation patches. These platforms will float on top of the water, so they will be able to adjust with the rising or lowering water temperatures. And if the terns for some reason do not see these platforms as suitable, other animals such as ducks will nest on these platforms as well. These platforms will be constructed primarily of PVC pipe, which is 1.5 inches in diameter and will be in a 34 by 34 inch frame. Inside of the frame, there will be styrofoam sheeting, which will bring structure and buoyancy to these platforms. Then they will be encased with plastic gardening fence to hold everything together, and then those will be attached with zip ties. Once everything is put together like that, everything except the styrofoam will be sprayed with a UV resistant black paint to prevent corrosion from the sun. Once the construction is complete, the platforms will be taken to Mud Lake, and there they will be prepped for installation with weights, and also that is when the sod will be placed on top of them. They will be anchored to the bottom of the relatively shallow lake, actually, with a dumbbell weight. And I would hope to place a trail camera nearby to observe the platform's productivity in a way that would prevent the disturbance of the terns. I have been given a lot of help from many people on this, but the Wisconsin DNR has been very helpful in gaining permits for this project. The Friends of the Cedarburg Bog has been very helpful in finding organizations to reach out to for funding, as well as getting in contact with local landowners for permission to use driveways as access to Mud Lake. And Mike Alamo from the Wisconsin Waterfowl Association, he was one of the first people in Wisconsin to start developing these platforms. And he started doing that about 3 or 4 years ago at Rome Pond near Rome, Wisconsin. And every year since then, he has changed them and perfected them, and now he is seeing very good results with the nesting terns. My timeline for the project, I would like to have funds raised, the platforms constructed, installed, and ready to go by spring migration of this year. If we get them in before migration, this would increase the chances of terns passing through and staying at these platforms on their way to other breeding locations such as Horicon or Mothie Lake in the northern Kettle Moraine. The budget for my project, the final budget will be somewhere in the ballpark of $1,500 to $1,600. Those funds include building materials, the sod for the platforms, and I would like to raise enough to purchase a cellular trail camera that we would be able to monitor these nests without actually going out and disturbing these terns. If you would be interested in supporting my Eagle project, you could mail a check written out to the Friends of the Cedarburg Bog with Braden Meyer Eagle Project on the memo line. Also on the Friends of the Cedarburg Bog website, there's a photo attached there. You can donate using PayPal. However, PayPal charges a 2.5% fee. So what you donate would be slightly less. So what the bog gets from your donation will be slightly less than what you give. And please mention your name and address when using PayPal if able. I would like to be able to send you a thank you once the project is completed. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your time. Does anybody have questions?
I have one. Do they compete with the woodcock in the Cedarburg Bog?
I do not believe so. Woodcocks are more brushy areas with openings that they can do their courtship display, whereas the terns would be in cattails and near open water.
Thank you. I did get a chance to get out there last spring and watch the dancing, and it was fabulous. It was fantastic. I'm so proud of you, young man, Braden. This is phenomenal work you're doing. And I'm in the middle of a divorce, and when I come into money, I'm going to give you some, okay? I'm very proud of you. Keep going, girl. Well, good boy. I mean, sorry, I said the wrong word. I apologize for that. I'm very proud of you.
Okay, Braden, thank you very much. Really appreciate the presentation, and I'm going to put the information back in an email to folks in case they didn't get that on where they can contribute. I'll put that in an email out to the club. I also wanted to let Braden know and the rest of the club know that the club itself is going to make a donation to Braden's project. We'll make a 10% down payment on his project and send him $150 from the Bird Club's resources, and hope that others of you who enjoyed this presentation tonight and are inspired by his ambitions to contribute as well. But as I say, all you have to do is to do this on the Friends of the Cedarburg Bog website. Just Google Friends of the Cedarburg Bog and they'll take you to the website, and you can do it right there. Otherwise, if anybody has any questions, they can email me. So Braden, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
Braden, you might want to type your contact information into the chat, and people can copy it right out of that too.
Sure, that's even smarter. Yeah.
Thank you, Braden.
So now we're going to move on to, as I said tonight, we had a double presentation tonight, and now I'm going to, we're going to go to the main bill tonight. We have as our guest tonight, Erin Giese, who is the data manager and senior research specialist at the Coffrin Center for Biodiversity at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. She coordinates and conducts field work for the Great Lakes Coastal Wetland Monitoring Program. She's done field work, extensive field work for the Wisconsin Breeding Bird Atlas, Christmas bird counts. She leads the Northeastern Wisconsin Audubon Society. She's been involved with the Lower Green Bay and Fox River Area of Concern, the Northern Forest Birds Network. The list is Wisconsin Society for Ornithology, Wisconsin Bird Conservation Partnership. She is one busy woman. And tonight she's going to talk to us about how record water levels impact the Great Lakes coastal wetland birds and amphibians. And I'm going to turn it over to her without any further palavering on my part. So, Erin, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Carl. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me tonight. And Braden, your talk was really interesting. You actually touched on a few things that I'll be covering tonight. So you did a great job introducing black terns and issues with Great Lakes water levels. And I really hope, not to sidetrack, but I really hope you consider going to college one day, because your presentation was excellent. You have the mind of a scientist already at such a young age, and I really hope you consider it. We do have a really good field program, including bird research at UW Green Bay. So anyway, I really hope you go to college because you'd be an excellent candidate, and I hope your project is successful.
Thank you.
Yep. And Carl, I don't know if it's too late, but his project would be eligible for a WSO grant as well. I don't know if he's considered that. And you're on mute.
I did reach out to WSO. I am awaiting feedback on whether it has been approved or not.
Okay, great. I was thinking that would be an excellent project to fund.
We just had a new grants program, a new grants committee chair take over, Jack Coulter. So I suspect, I hope you'll hear back before too long.
Okay. Oh, good. Yeah, Jack's a great guy. That's awesome. Well, good luck to you, Braden. And again, thanks for the nice introduction for my talk. So I'm here tonight to tell you a little bit about these record high water levels we've been experiencing in the Great Lakes and how they're impacting both Great Lakes coastal wetlands as well as birds and anurans that use these ecosystems to thrive. And when I say anuran, that's just a fancy term for frogs and toads. They're just a subset of amphibians. The work that I'm going to be presenting on tonight is based on several publications. So I've listed co-authors from all of the papers that I'll be kind of summarizing tonight, and their names are listed at the bottom. And I'll share with you those papers in a moment. So Carl did a great job introducing me already, so thank you for that. So just a couple of facts about my family. My husband's in the bottom left photo here, and our nearly 15-month-old son, Rainer, is in the bottom right. My husband and I really like to travel, had the fortune of visiting all 7 continents before kids. And then now our lives are quite a bit different. And if you do hear crying, my baby is asleep, but hopefully he just sleeps through everything. But hopefully we won't be surprised by that. But anyway, thanks again for having me. So as I mentioned, these are a couple of the publications that I'll be summarizing tonight. So on the top across the banner, there's that was a poster that my student Brittany Hirsch put together looking at anuran occurrences during different water levels in the Lower Green Bay and Fox River area of concern. So I'll have a little bit of information on that, as well as these 2 papers published in the Journal of Great Lakes Research. The middle one, and can you see my cursor, by the way? Can someone confirm whether you can see that?
Yes.
You can. Okay, thank you, Carl. That'll be important later, especially. So we looked at water level effects of in coastal wetlands in the Bay of Green Bay and how they impact birds and anurans. So that was sort of just targeting the Bay of Green Bay and Lake Michigan. And then our graduate student, Tara Holman, her thesis was looking at water level changes on marsh birds across the entire Great Lakes Basin. So I'll be summarizing results from all three of these publications as we go through tonight. So right away, I'll talk quite a bit about Great Lakes water levels in general and how they change and why they change, as well as Great Lakes coastal wetlands themselves. There's a lot of different ways you can classify coastal wetlands. So I'll talk a little bit about that and then introduce our beloved bird and Erin friends. And then I'll talk about the Great Lakes Coastal Wetland Monitoring Program, which is really the meat of the data that are behind all of the publications that I shared with you on the previous slide. It's a project that I've been a part of since 2011, and we're entering our 11th year of sampling this year. And that's what's behind, that's the date, those are all the data behind the results that I'll then share with you. And then I'll close by sharing with you how it is that you can help birds and anurans and make a difference. And then I'll close and open it up for questions. So Great Lakes water levels fluctuate all the time. They can fluctuate by a centimeter or an inch every hour, every couple of hours. It can change by many inches over days, feet, and multiple feet over the course of years and decades. And this is a natural phenomenon. They're always going up and down throughout the day and throughout the year. They're different than the oceans. They don't really have a tidal effect, although scientists do say they have a mild tidal effect connected to the moon. But really, the main reason that they are constantly fluctuating is for the reasons listed here. The first one being seiche, which is what is shown on the right here in this image. So think of the Great Lakes almost like a giant bathtub where wind is blowing, except it's a windy bathtub, I guess. So imagine wind blowing over the water, blowing over the Great Lake, whatever that is, and it's basically pushing that water up and over the, what a still level would be. And then once it sloshes up that way, then, what does a bathtub do, right? It just sloshes the other way and it just goes back and forth. Of course, it's not as rapidly sloshing like a bathtub, like an actual bathtub, but it's going up and down, and it's seiche is wind driven. So that's one reason they move in terms of up and down. And then of course they also change due to, seasonal rains and snowfall, and then storms. I'll get into that in a little bit later to show the impact of storms that can affect these lake levels. And then there's other basin-wide climatic factors that can contribute to it. So these water levels are going up and down, and that's what this graph shows. You don't really need to pay attention to the details, except that this is a graph showing the fluctuations of water levels according to the Sturgeon Bay Water Monitoring Station from 1905 to 2017. So you can see that they're constantly going up and down, up and down, up and down. And then they make these big drops, or they go back up and they're going up and down and up and down and up and down. So this is nothing new. This happens all the time. But it makes it for challenging, right? Challenging if you're a landowner on a lake, that can make for some fun times. But let's zoom in a little bit and look at lake levels in the more recent years. So this is a graph showing water levels from 2011 to 2019. And you can see here, don't really need to worry, these are in meters, but what's important is that we've reached historic record lows in 2013 in the Great Lakes. And then we've reached record highs for multiple years in a row. And actually, we've reached yet another record high in 2020. And depending on how you measure the difference between the two, that can be a difference between anywhere from 3 to 5 feet. I'm like 5.5 feet tall. So 5 feet is a tremendous amount of water, especially if you live along the lake shore. If you imagine the plants that are living there, that's going to really dramatically change, what that shoreline is looking like. So we've been experiencing a lot of change in water. This is a graphic just showing you by lake the difference in the amount of open water. So this was a graphic put together by our grad student Tara, and she quantified percent area of open water between 2013 and 2018. And you can see that not all water level fluctuations are the same across lakes. You can see lakes Huron, Michigan, and Erie have, quite a big jump in amount of water between those paired years, whereas in Lakes Ontario and Superior, not as much. And that's because those lakes are regulated or semi-regulated, so that's why they didn't jump as much. But here in Lake Michigan, we're certainly seeing these big jumps. So anyway, just the point is, it's not all the same across the basin. And this map shows you just a different view of that previous graph. So what's important here is looking at the red circles, red, orange, or green circles. So this is a map showing different places around the Great Lakes Basin in coastal wetlands, and the red, yellow, and green circles have experienced an increase in water. And right away, what jumps out to you is Lakes Michigan, Lakes Huron, and Erie, whereas Lake Ontario and Lake Superior, not as much. That's kind of a neat way to look at it. Not all areas experience the same amount of water change. So these lake levels, as you can imagine, have a big impact on the coastal wetlands that exist along those shorelines. So in terms of our project for the Great Lakes Coastal Wetland Monitoring Program, this is a map showing all of the possible coastal wetlands that we survey in any given batch of 5 years. So there's lots of ways you can classify or describe a coastal wetland, but the ones that we're sampling are at least 4 hectares in size. 1 hectare is roughly the size of a football field. So imagine 4 Lambeau Field size coastal wetlands. And these wetlands are dominated by open herbaceous plants, kind of like the plants that Braden described. These are places that have emergent vegetation. So cattail, for example, Phragmites, even though it's an invasive, that's still an emergent plant. We also survey places with sedges and grasses, bulrush, rush, reed canary grass, any of those sorts of places, basically areas that are not shrubby or woody. And then most importantly, these wetlands are connected to and influenced by a Great Lake. And there are 3 ways that a coastal wetland can be influenced by a Great Lake, and it lies within these different categories. So some wetlands are lacustrine wetlands or coastal wetlands, these yellow orange colored dots. These are wetlands that are adjacent to the lake. So these are wetlands that are right along the lake shore, and you can imagine that they're getting beat with storm surge or ice shoves or these high lake levels. They're getting a big beating because they're positioned right along the lake shore. So they're constantly being influenced by lake levels and other issues. The green dots are riverine wetlands. So these are wetlands that are coastal wetlands that are along a stream, a river, a creek. And then the blue dots are barrier protected wetlands. So these are places that have some sort of a barrier, like a sandbar, for example, that slightly protect that wetland, but they're still getting that impact of water from those. So anyway, these are places that we survey around the Great Lakes. And as you can see, we do have teams that survey in Canada. We have some Canadian colleagues for our project. So here's a couple of examples of the types of wetlands that we're surveying around the Great Lakes. So they look similar in that they're all, emergent plants, but all the plants can be a little bit different depending on where you're surveying. So I mentioned storms are one of the things that can help, or I guess that impact and cause lake level changes. So if you're looking for something fun to do, go to the Brown County GIS portal. It's free online, and you can look at historical imagery dating back to 1938. So where we're looking is in Green Bay, Wisconsin. This is the very, very lower part of the bay. This is Duck Creek coming out here. And there used to be a historic chain of barrier islands, these skinny little rectangles where my mouse is tracing. They went for many miles out into the lower bay here. And they protected a huge submergent emergent marsh here that came out of Duck Creek. And it was glorious, I hear. There was huge numbers of migratory waterfowl and colonial nesting water birds. Black terns were huge in the lower bay historically, and it was incredible. However, in the early 1970s, you can see this paired image, lake levels went way sky high, and there were really, really bad, nasty storms that took out and washed away these islands here. So you can see that they're gone. There's a couple of remnants where my mouse is pointing that do exist even today. But because of the high waters and the bad storms, washed them all away. And also that was a natural barrier that protected that emergent submergent marsh. There were also some issues with poorer water quality, I think, that did impact, why some of these plants disappeared, at least behind here. But you can see, the tremendous damage that water levels can cause and bad storms. So this is a pretty drastic example. Totally unrelated to this presentation, but just if you're curious, there is an effort where we're rebuilding these islands. There's actually a many mile long causeway out into the lower bay. And we're rebuilding these islands. Not me. This would be the Army Corps of Engineers working with Brown County and conservationists. And we actually do have piping plovers nesting out here now because some of the islands have been filled in with dredge material. Anyway, feel free to ask me about that in the questions, but just if you're curious, there is an effort to rebuild. Here's another set of images. Actually, I'll back up here. So I mentioned this is Duck Creek. This is in 1970. You can see the highway here. So what I'm doing now is I'm zooming in on this area, but bringing you into the present time. So this is, again, Duck Creek coming out here in Lower Green Bay. And you can see in low water in 2014, there's this, island, little submergent island here. Most of this is cattail or Phragmites. And slowly, year by year, you don't see the chain of events and imagery here, but jump to last year, that island is basically gone. And there's only a little bit of marsh remaining here. And so you might start to ask yourself, well, how in the world is anything surviving there? How are there birds, using these places? And certainly these are extreme examples where some places, lose most of the marsh or in some cases, all of the marsh in high water. It will come back, of course, but there are some places where some added water is actually a very good thing. It can be a very good thing. So this is Peters Marsh. This is, I'll just back up here, this is Peters Marsh right here. So we'll jump to this scene here. You can see this is the causeway that's built out to reconstruct those islands, just for reference. But anyway, so this is Peters Marsh in low water. Down out here is mostly cattail. And then as it dries up further in, you'll grade into Phragmites and reed canary grass. And then when the water levels started to go up, you can see here that this cattail marsh now has these open pockets. So all these darker areas are water. And this is why a fair bit of water can be a really good thing, because what's creating here is additional edge habitat between the emergent vegetation and the water, which is really, really cool because that creates additional habitat for bugs, for fish, and of course, our bird friends really like that, and it'll attract a different suite of birds in these wetter areas. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Just if you're curious. So not all water is bad. This is sort of the point. I just wanted to show you a couple of those dramatic examples because they truly are incredible. So getting to the fun part about birds and anurans. So just make sure everyone's on the same page here. I know we all, you guys are part of a bird club, so obviously you care a lot about birds, but there's some inherent other reasons why birds are important besides how cool they are and how pretty they are. Like most animals, they really do serve an ecosystem function. So they're a part of the food web. Some birds predate other animals and bugs and other birds. Other birds will eat fruit or seeds and might might serve as a seed disperser. Others will pollinate on flowers or other plants, and that helps flowers and plants reproduce. So they do have an inherent role just to make sure that our habitats and ecosystems function properly. They also serve as pest control. A single tree swallow can consume up to 2,000 insects a day during the breeding season. So, they can be really helpful, certainly for agricultural areas like barn swallows. And birds, like other animals, can be very, very helpful in terms of being bioindicators of environmental issues, where the presence or absence of a species will tell you about the health of an ecosystem. So some birds are sensitive to pollution or habitat degradation. And so if they're absent, that might tell you that there's something wrong with that system there. They can also be cleanup crews. So I've got a picture. I know we don't have black vultures here in Wisconsin, but vultures in general and bald eagles certainly consume dead animals, carcasses, carrion, and help clean up our system. And then, of course, birds are great for the economy. Braden mentioned he likes to go chase rare birds. So yeah, so do I. And that can bring people into places for hotels and food. That can provide money to the economy in that way. And certainly a lot of people do bird feeding and hunting. So hopefully you agree that birds are important. But unfortunately, birds are not doing great. There's a study that was released in 2019 that since 1970, 2.9 billion birds are gone. And I had to write 2.9 billion out in zeros to really let that sink in. 1 in 4 birds have disappeared. Some bird groups are more imperiled than others, like grassland birds, some forest birds, and boreal habitats. And so, there's reasons for that, which I'll get into. And it's pretty scary. And wetland birds are a group that are of concern. So this is a graphic from the Great Lakes Marsh Monitoring Program, which looked at data collected for their project between 1995 and 2012. And you can see that there are only a couple of winners and many losers species here. So the ones with the bar graphs going down in red are species that have declined in terms of detections at their sampling locations. So not surprisingly, black tern, as Braden mentioned, is not doing well. They are a listed species along with Forrester's tern. And some other ones that are in trouble are American coot, common gallinule, soar and Virginia rails, American bittern, and pied-billed grebe. Whereas sandhill crane and trumpeter swan are doing really well. So, birds matter, and Great Lakes wetland birds matter, but there are reasons why they're declining. Braden mentioned a few of these. So like all birds, there's some major issues with habitat fragmentation and habitat loss. Wetlands have been drained. They've been filled or converted into other habitats. So that's all not good news. And birds collide with windows during migration. Invasive species are an issue, particularly in wetlands. They're plagued with many invasive plants that promote less species richness of birds. Outdoor cats are major killers of birds in general. Braden mentioned pesticides, of course, and pollution are both bad. And then, of course, climate change, the big elephant in the room, that is already having impact on birds. So I don't want to be too doom and gloom. I will end up flipping this story around and at the very end and suggest ways that you can help make a difference in birds. But I just want to paint the picture of birds in general. And the Great Lakes region is a tremendously important area for birds in the breeding season in particular. So these dark colored peach, darkest color areas are areas that have really high breeding bird species richness. And that jumps out big time on this map, in addition to areas along the Appalachian Mountains. So birds are great. I know we all care about birds. And they fill really important roles in Great Lakes coastal wetlands, and so do anurans, or frogs and toads, like I mentioned. So there are about a dozen possible species of anurans in the Great Lakes region. So I've only shared with you pictures of 5 of the species. So there's a couple of gray tree frog species here in the upper left. This is our friend. So the gray tree frog, they're generally pretty small. You might have a couple inch, maybe, 2, 3, 4 inches long. You might have seen them stuck to your window. They often call in trees. This is a northern leopard frog with the spots here. Those guys can get quite large. They tend to be a deeper marsh species, and then they migrate out into the woodlands. So you might see them crossing roads and things to get to wooded areas. And then our noisy friend, the spring peeper in the middle, this tiny little guy, it can only, is only like an inch, a couple inches long, biggest, loudest peep. Probably heard it before. That can be deafening. They can be calling in the thousands, and you can barely hear yourself think because they're so darn loud. Bottom right is a green frog. This is a later season species. It's one of my favorite calls, just kind of goes boom. And you'll hear a bunch of them in some deeper wetland areas. And then the top right is our American toad. These guys can get quite large, and they tend to like drier areas. And then some other not pictured here, we have wood frog, very rarely Fowler's toad, very rarely Blanchard's cricket frog, pickerel frog, mink frog, chorus frog, bull frog. Might have missed one, but those are some of the examples of anurans. Like birds, they're really important. They also fulfill an ecosystem function in the food web. Lots of things eat anurans, but anurans fight back, and they also eat a lot of mosquitoes, which is really helpful. They can also serve as bioindicators of environmental issues and health. They are also a cleanup crew, and people do end up hunting frogs as well. Anurans generally around the globe are declining for many of the similar reasons as birds, pretty much the same reasons. They also do have diseases that they're dealing with. The chytrid fungus is one that Great Lakes anurans do encounter. And then it's important to remember anuran skin is partially porous. So, pollution and things can actually get sucked into their skin and into their bodies, which is not good. But even though there are global declines of anurans in general, according to the Great Lakes Marsh Monitoring Program, several of the species they've found to be stable. That's the ones with the white bars here in the middle, with increasing numbers of green frogs, but decreasing numbers of chorus frogs. Okay, so that's an introduction to Great Lakes water levels, the coastal wetlands that we survey in, and then of course our bird and anuran friends. And now I'll just introduce briefly the program that we run called the Great Lakes Coastal Wetland Monitoring Program. So this is a project that I mentioned. We've been sampling for the past 10 years. We're entering our 11th sampling season. This is a project run by dozens of scientists around the Great Lakes, including the US and Canada. We all collect data in exactly the same way, in standardized methods, and crews around the Great Lakes survey birds and anurans, certainly, but there are other crews that go to these same places and sample for fish, invertebrates, and vegetation, as well as collecting water quality data. The main point of the program is to look at long-term trends and get a sense of, where these species are living and how they're doing across time. But excuse me, that's my phone alarm. But the main reason is we're developing indicators using these plants and animals. Ultimately, we want to know which of the wetlands in the Great Lakes are of highest quality, which ones are highly degraded, which ones have potential to be restored or enhanced. And so we're using the data that we collect on these organisms to develop those indicator tools. And this is just a sampling of the project leaders around the Great Lakes. We are funded through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and we've got folks from different universities and agencies across the US and Canada. For Endurance, we have students that go out to the field and survey a batch of wetlands each night. And so you can imagine a person standing in the middle of this circle. They conduct 3-minute unlimited distance point counts. So what that means is they stand in the same place for 3 minutes and they record all the endurance that they hear around them and count them if they can. Otherwise, indicate if it's a chorus that's calling. And each wetland is sampled 3 times across the spring and summer. Anurans emerge out of hibernation at different times based on overnight temperature. So that's why we visit it 3 times, is because early in the season, you're going to get a very different suite of species than late in the season. And then birds, we do two surveys, once in the morning, once in the evening throughout the season. And again, you just imagine the person standing here in the middle of this circle and you record everything you see or hear around you within a 10-minute period as well. Okay, so what have we learned so far, at least in terms of lake level effects on birds? And generally what we've found is that more water leads to more bird species. So you might remember earlier in my slides, I showed you those satellite images of Peters Marsh, where I pointed out in low water, it's a pretty consistent stand of emergent vegetation. And then a few years later, when the water levels went up, pockets of water started forming in the middle of that cattail marsh and created a lot more edge habitat, the edge ratio between, edge habitat between vegetation and water. And that just creates a whole new avenue for fish and insects and new places for species to nest. And so that really is why you'll see more bird species in these wetlands. And as I mentioned, it's, the changes across lakes are not exactly the same, but generally you can see the trend when water levels increase, species richness of birds also goes up. And these are results from Tara, our graduate student's master's thesis. So this is looking at water level effects on birds across the entire Great Lakes Basin. And she found that pied-billed grebe, rails, both the bitterns, coot and gallinule marsh wren, and red-winged blackbird tend to prefer higher water, whereas the opposite side of things, sandhill crane, swamp sparrow, and common yellowthroat preferred lower water. So you can see different species prefer different things. Just because it's low water, just because it's high water doesn't mean you're not going to find a swamp sparrow, and vice versa. You can find these species generally in either case. It's just, at which point do you see more of them based on water level, and that's kind of how they sort out here. And then these are results from the paper I led, where we just looked at marsh birds in the Bay of Green Bay, and the results are very similar to the ones that we found across the Great Lakes Basin, with a couple of exceptions. And this is a nice visual looking at sedge wren versus marsh wren, and this is from the Bay of Green Bay only. So what you're looking at is, the years in which we looked at these changes from 2011 to 2017, and these brown, orange, peach colors indicate low water, and then the bluish colors are high water. And you can see sedge wren, which we found tends to prefer lower water, which makes sense. Sedge wrens like to nest in sedgy, grassy habitats. But it's really cool to be able to document that across years, knowing that we experienced low water years in these 2011 to 13, and then there were far fewer of them detected in high water because there was less habitat available. Whereas the opposite trend happens with marsh wren. They are still present in low water, certainly, but there was more habitat available for them in high water, and so they were detected a lot more frequently. So anurans also have a similar story. So these are Tara's thesis only looked at birds, but for our paper, we looked at anurans and how they differ in terms of lake levels in the Bay of Green Bay. And we found that more water led to more anuran species, again, because there's more habitat, a variety of habitat available for them. And we found that bullfrog, green frog, northern leopard frog, and wood frog preferred higher water. And the only one that we documented that preferred lower water was American toad. And again, just because one likes the water a certain way doesn't mean you can't find them in both cases. And this is a nice graphic that kind of breaks this down a little bit. So American toad, remember, is the species that prefers lower water. So in years 2011, 12, and 13, these brown peach colors, what's important is the thickness of the bar. So the taller the bar, the more they were detected. So that's the case for these orange or brown peach colors. And then they tapered off in these bluish colors, and we found them less frequently. Whereas the opposite is true for bullfrog, for example. They were hardly detected in low water here, these brown colors, and then boom, they spiked up in these blue years, these wetter years. And you might be wondering why this whole bar is just shorter in general. We just didn't detect bullfrog as much as we did some of these other species. So yeah, you can see that in the green frog example here. They were still detected in low water years, but really spiked and were detected a lot more frequently in these wetter years. And that's the same story for northern leopard frog and wood frog. Whereas if you look at gray tree frog and spring peeper, they were detected fairly evenly across all lake levels. So they did not really have an impact. They were not really affected by lake levels. And then I flagged wood frog. You might be wondering what this exception arrow is. For those of you who know frogs, wood frog is an early caller. They they'll be calling probably, the way things are warming up, they could be calling within the next month or less. They start to call when it's 5 degrees Celsius, at least 5 degrees Celsius or 41 degrees Fahrenheit overnight, once the snow and the ice is gone. But they're really finicky. They often will only call for a couple of weeks, and then they don't call again till the following season. So they have a very short vocalization period. And in those early years of this project, we just missed them. And so should just take this result with a grain of salt. It's not that they weren't there in these early years, it's that we missed them due to field reasons. And then this is another neat visual aid that shows you, so this is from my student Brittany Hirsch's poster that she put together. She made these maps for a class project. This yellow boundary is the lower Green Bay and Fox River area of concern. For reference, this was the Cat Island area, the Duck Creek Delta. When I was showing you the historical imagery, this is the area I was pointing out. Anyway, what's neat about this visualization, it shows you the differences in high and low water for green frog detection. So each of these dots are just survey locations that we surveyed. The plus signs mean that the species was not detected at all. But you can see these orange dots, that shows you where they were detected in high water years. And the blue dot is high and low water. And the purple dot was low water only. So you can see green frogs like it wet. They like this, this higher water. And the reason that they were detected at these couple of points here and here, this orange, these orange and blue, is because there's a stream that comes into here that's got some deeper areas that it was probably detected at. And there's a lagoon here at this blue dot where they likely would have been found. That kind of is always there, high or low water. So that's kind of neat, nice visual aid. And then toad, remember, is the species that prefers lower water years. And you can see the aqua and pink dots are places in low water. The pink dots also represent high water, but you can tell that, they really did like it, prefer low water for breeding. So some take-home messages. I always like to end my talks with a couple of summary points. Hopefully I've convinced you that Great Lakes coastal wetlands are extremely dynamic, and it's because of these water levels that can really drastically change these wetlands. And it's incredible that even in a place that gets flooded or severely flooded out, once the water goes down, those plants are going to come back, and different animals will inhabit those. And it's just this ever-changing ebb and flow of water and changing vegetation and changing, which birds or nurns can be found in them. And that leads me to the next bullet. Considering how dynamic these systems are, it's amazing how resilient these birds and nurns are, giving these ever-changing systems, especially nurns. Birds can always fly and look somewhere else, but nurns are pretty restricted in terms of where they can hop off to safely. So knowing how dynamic these coastal wetlands are and how Great Lakes water levels are always going to be going up and down, it's really important that a variety of wetlands are protected and managed. So ones that will provide habitat during both low and high water conditions. And that's really critical from a management perspective. So you might be wondering what you can do to help birds and nurns. And I always like to throw in quotes in my talks, and I'm a firm believer that you are never too small to make a difference. And no matter what that is, if that means you're going to be better at recycling, or you're going to take one less trip to on an outing, or combined trips, carpool, whatever that is, every little thing does matter. And there are ways that you can make changes in your own lives. And what's really fascinating is just how much of Wisconsin is owned privately. So there's nearly 35 million acres of land in Wisconsin, and nearly 29 million of those 35 million acres are owned privately. So if you live, in terms of wetlands, if you live on the lake shore or a lake or a river, or even if you live in the forest, or for me, we live in Appleton. We live in town. We don't have any nice forested natural habitat anywhere near us. Every person can make a difference. Even if you live in an apartment, there's things you can do. And here's a short list of things that you can change and do to help birds and nurns. If you have landscaping on your property, it's best to get rid of invasive plants and replace them with natives, or at least something that's not as aggressive of a species. That's what we did. We moved here in 2016 into our house, and there were a lot of invasives planted as ornamentals. And so we dug those up and got rid of them and replaced them with sometimes native or sometimes ornamental but not aggressive invasive plants. We also have a small native plot in our backyard that's fenced off to keep the bunnies from eating them all, that we've got. Well, I'm drawing a blank on the coneflower. And then this year I'm hoping to plant some goldenrod and milkweed. And all these native plants will bring really neat butterflies, bees, and birds, of course, to your property. And it's a really important to do minimal amount of work on your lawns. So minimizing your pesticide application, or maybe don't rake all of your leaves. I'll be honest, we live in town. We live on a street full of people that care a lot about their lawns, which is totally fine. But we try to kind of find a balance between making our yard look presentable, living in town, but also with an environmental side of things, where we minimize what chemicals we put on it. We don't rake all of our leaves. Leaves provide habitat for anurans. If you live in an area where you would have anurans, I certainly don't, but they also can provide food sources for birds. You'll see them digging around in there. Anytime you have a large contiguous amount of natural habitat, whether that's a wetland or a riverway or a forest, it's always good to just try to leave it as large as possible. And if you do live in a place with a wooded area, leaving brush piles for birds, woody debris, those are all places for birds to hide in or forage in. Snags and hollowed out trees might attract some nesting birds or birds foraging. If you live along a shoreline, it's always great to maintain natural shorelines as best as you can, instead of hardening them with riprap or other things. And maintaining riparian buffers, certainly. And then, of course, if you can, please keep your cat indoors. And another, thanks. I heard Carl pitch some importance, at least to submit to eBird. So one of the things, if you want to become a more engaged wildlife watcher, there are ways that you can do that. So if you regularly go birding somewhere on a trail or a park, or if you just sit in your house and watch your backyard bird feeder, anything, all those data can be contributed to eBird. And sure, eBird is great, if you want to find that red pole that someone found and you want to go look for one, that's certainly useful. But there's also a really important reason, and that's that scientists will use eBird data for big analyses, particularly climate change and migration type studies. And all of those data are just so helpful. So, even if you think your silly 10-minute checklist isn't meaningful, it really is. It can be for many scientists to help us better understand birds. Obviously, it'd be great if I know you guys are part of this bird club, but anytime you can volunteer to help it or donate, so certainly donate to Braden's Blacktern project, for example, is a great ways to contribute to conservation. And then if you're interested in being more active, there's lots of community science projects that you can become involved in. If you know your birds and anurans by call, you can participate in the Great Lakes Marsh Monitoring Program or the DNR's Wisconsin Frog and Toad Survey. And then those other 4 bullets are other bird projects like Christmas bird count, Great Backyard Bird Count. Those all just ended, but now we're entering, potential for things like the Crane Watch or Climate Watch. That's an Audubon project that is active, I think, in like February and May, I believe. But anyway, you get the picture. There's lots of ways you can participate and become a more engaged wildlife watcher, and all those data sets, help scientists make bigger conclusions about birds and anurans. Okay, I guess that's it. With that, I'll open for questions. And these are just pictures of some of the 10 years worth of students and researchers that have helped our immediate team where we survey birds and anurans.
So first of all, everybody unmute. Mary, if you can unmute everybody so we can give Erin a round of applause so it's not just me clapping.
Yay! Awesome! Awesome job.
I like to think that the best.
Everybody needs to mute.
Oh, it's okay it's okay if people unmute. Because we're gonna have questions now. Quick, I think we can unmute. I just wanted to say to Erin that my favorite programs are those in which we do things we've never done before, and this was a fascinating look at what a real scientist is doing that brings some dimension to what us citizen scientists are interested in, and yet she also has given us a way that we can pay more attention to what we're doing both in our daily lives and in projects we can undertake. So doubly grateful for that presentation. I'm gonna, before I open it up to general questions, and I have a couple myself, I got a couple of things from the chat room I'm gonna ask about. Aaron, Ron wanted to know, there were green asterisks on the slide with the exception arrow. What were those?
Oh, yeah, great question. It was just to point out those that, those were significant results. So those were ones that were significantly affected by water levels in some way. Sorry for not clarifying that at the time. Good eye.
And then Braden wanted to ask, is that area that you were showing in those early slides, is that where the Ken Ures wildlife area is?
It is, yes. Let me go back and share it so I can point that out specifically.
And while you're getting there, Jim Ellis wanted to ask, was he correct that the Forster's terns have started breeding out there on Cat Island?
Close, yeah, in that area, yes. So I'll answer the Ken Ures question first, since I'm here on the slide, and then address the Forster's tern. So this is the Ken Ures property here, where my mouse is tracing. So, and then here in high water. So yeah, it's diked here. That's why it looks, that's why there are these really hard edged areas here. So the terns, well, I'll have to show it to you. Oh, actually, I'll show it to you on the Inurin map. That's probably the best place. I'll just zoom right in. Okay, so this is, I know it's hard to see because of the dots, but this is a long causeway here. This is where people are rebuilding those historic chain of barrier islands, the Cat Island chain here. And there have been Forster's terns nesting on artificial platforms that were placed out here several years ago. But those platforms have since been removed, and they're actually trying to, they're building more permanent structures for common terns out in this area. However, the DNR has been putting out Forster's tern platforms in this area, in the Duck Creek area, and those have been successful. So to answer your question, yes, they do indeed nest in the lower bay, but not quite here, as the question was asked.
So I'd open it up. Anybody else have a question?
I had a
Yes, I had a question or something. Yeah.
Who you're not
ready?
Identified?
I'm Tina. My name's Tina Christensen, and I'm a master naturalist and a master gardener, and I love nature. I think this program is excellent, and I was going to transfer her research to our local area. So I live a block north of the Highway 60 in Grafton along the river. We have the big bullfrogs, and we have toads up by the house. If everybody engaged as you described, we could create a society that would forever preserve our nature. My thought along the Milwaukee River, as I'm part of the Community River Project, was to do just such, that many people mow their lawns, which you don't have to. And I grew native Wisconsin seed with Bob Foss, who is an excellent educator, lover of Native American or Wisconsin plants. And I worked at River Edge volunteering to do that, from seed, going out and procuring them, to selling them with Bob. And of course, with the COVID, we weren't able to. But I envision your place, what you described, for every community, that we teach them how to compost, that we teach them not to mow their lawns, that we preserve what on the shores, we preserve the river project to clean up Milwaukee River, and all the banks that are the, grounds as you described. The leopard tree, the leopard frog is in Lion's Den. Lots of them. If you take the boardwalk out when the water's up, you can see them just sitting in there. And we have I believe it's the emerald dragonfly out there as well. So this is just beautiful how we can transform your work in Green Bay to our local area here. And as a child, I grew up along Winnebago, and my father was a doctor, and he moved from Ohio to Wisconsin to be, he's a fisherman. And while I couldn't catch much, all his vacation was that, I was looking at the birds.
Is there a question there?
I'm just saying that the beautiful research of the combination of the frogs and our love of the birds are their food. And we're seeing that we can transform her Green Bay work into our local area and have appreciation for everybody's love of all different things. So our love is birds, but really, what do they feed on? And you said that one word, I forget it again, with the birds and the amphibians.
So I'm going to interrupt here and just say to you, Erin, how much I love it that you love the anurans.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I did
Awesome.
get your comment, Jim. Thank you. They are very neat, and they have very
I can hear them. I
interesting-
can't hear the birds always. I love the birds, so.
They can be very loud, yes.
Erin, did any of your work cover, this was all breeding period work, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So I wondered if you had studied at all the impact on lake levels on migration at all. Okay.
Nope, it's all breeding work.
Yeah, I can, my one observation from being up there in that Ken Years area, now Cat Island now is becoming a wonderful migration. You can look at the Ebert report, see how wonderful Cat Island has become. But when Ken Years had a little less water than it is now, you could get out there and you could see a lot more migrants. A lot of those migrating shorebirds and everything that no longer have a place to.
Yes, right. It's too wet in Ken Years. Yes.
Okay, time for one more question?
I had a quick question.
Sure.
The so-called dead zone in Green Bay, what's happening with that, Erin? Is that on the decrease? My understanding that's from excessive farm runoff, mostly from excessive farm runoff. And has that farm runoff impacted some of your studies along the coastal areas?
You cut out, I think my internet is unstable, but you're asking about the dead zone in Green Bay and kind of what the status is of it?
Yeah, the status of the dead zone, and has that farm runoff phenomenon, has that been a factor in some of your coastal research findings?
Well, I haven't looked, I don't study water quality directly, but there are crews that are surveying and sampling water quality at all of our coastal wetlands. But, Green Bay is still very much Green Bay still very much has major runoff coming in from agricultural fields, lots of phosphorus in particular, and people do feel that it's affecting which plants are able to grow in some of these areas, like wild rice, for example. It's I've heard that it's the water quality is too poor, for example, to allow it to grow. So there are people working on it and trying to improve water quality, but it is no small feat to be working on improving that, for sure.
Erin, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, everybody. A really nice turnout tonight for this bird club to have, including the people who were on here with a couple people on. We had at least 40 people here tonight, so that's very encouraging. And keep with us until next month. April 6th, whooping cranes. April 9th, in-person woodcocks. And looking ahead, put May 15th on your calendar for the Birdathon Bandathon. So with that, we'll see you again, and thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Thank you
all.
so much for having me. Bye-bye.
Good night. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.